It's important that everybody practices conservation. I think it's important that everybody gets out there and enjoys the outdoors, whether it be one thing or another. You don't have to go hunting. You don't have to go fishing. It's go out there and just experience the outdoors.
Mm-hmm. Hi, my name is Drew Youngdyke. Welcome to the National Wildlife Federation Outdoors Podcast. We have some great guests today. We're here at the National Wildlife Federation annual meeting in St. Louis, Missouri, and we're here with Shilo Harris and Andrew Black. Shilo, could you tell me about the work that you're doing right now to connect people with the outdoors?
So, I am a wounded service member that was injured on my second tour in Iraq. I retired out of the United States Army a couple of years after my injury. So, as a burn survivor, with catastrophic injuries, it was challenging for me going through my recovery to think about the possibilities of what I could and couldn't do in the outdoors. So, once I did get out there and start experiencing the outdoors again, I realized that there were things that I could do, and I just had to take precautions. I had to prepare myself properly. I had to study the terrain, and just like any survivalist, any outdoorsman would, to be prepared for the situation that you're about to, take on, whether it be whitewater rafting, mountain climbing, hunting, fishing, whatever the case. Be prepared. And I know that probably sounds, a little bit stereotypical, but it's the truth. It's just like in the military. You got to be prepared for just about anything. Unfortunately, my injuries caused me a lot of self-doubt. Being in the outdoors encourages that confidence to do these things again, and I'm able to teach my children things that I grew up with. Now, something that I've really been impressed with being a part of the NWF, in the last few months, we had an introduction where we went and did some lobbying in DC, and which was a great lead in, and then me being here at the conference, it's like I was telling Andrew a little bit ago. I was like, there's so much that I want to say to this audience, but I don't want it to sound like a reiteration of what the program is already doing, because I know that y'all are doing so many great things. But the outdoors, it's not just for one individual, it's for everybody. And I see it with my children. It's hard to pull them away from the television or their phones or whatever it is nowadays that's a distraction, which is so much. But we get out there and we do things without those electronics, and you can see the kids actually using their hands and using their heads to do some of those basic things that you grew up with, some of the things that I grew up with. And I think that's so important that we teach our youth that, and we encourage so many people in the community to get out there and experience it again if they haven't in quite a while.
What's the name of your program that you're using to connect people with the outdoors in that way?
As a motivational speaker, I didn't really have a program in the beginning. I didn't want to start my own nonprofit. I didn't want to start a charity because there's so many of them out there. Something I mentioned on stage today with the NWF was that there are over 80,000 veteran-based nonprofit organizations out there. And, and that was the statistic a couple of years. I hadn't really looked at that recently. But, you think about that. Even if it's 80, 85, 90,000, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are geared towards the outdoors. So my company, one of the company names that we've founded was Boundless Spirit. As Jamie and I were out here living our life, and really and truly, that's what we did. We just, not like we really sought to turn it into a business, but there's so many, we noticed that we were reaching a lot of people just from our social media, people seeing us out there doing things that I probably, in some people's eyes, shouldn't be doing, because of my disabilities and, the way I look. But I'm here to tell you that that is what helps me get through those tough days, being out there. We want people to know that you can be a boundless spirit. We want people to know that you need to get out there and live your life and get in and experience the outdoors. Something that I mentioned also that I tell just about everybody is being in the wilderness, away from electronics, for 20 minutes to an hour can drop your stress levels down significantly. And I think that's important. That's a message that needs to be delivered. Whether I'm doing it through Boundless Spirit or through the NWF or through other organizations, that's what I'm going to continue to do.
What's been the most surprising thing since you started this initiative that you've seen come out of the response to what you're doing?
I have witnessed some of these other service members that I would consider significantly more injured than I am, or their injuries are different from mine. Like, for example, I helped get a blind veteran outdoors on a hunt, which probably sounds kind of crazy, but he had very low vision, but he was able to, see through a scope, minimally. But his goal, when we got him out there in the country in Texas, he wanted to go arrowhead hunting. And to be honest, we thought about maybe setting it up for success. And I told him, I said, let's just take him to an area where where there's a good potential that he could find an arrowhead. And you know what? He was on his hands and knees crawling around for about 30 minutes. And I know this probably sounds crazy, but no kidding. He's out there and he could barely see out of one of his eyes. And he's out there crawling around on his hands and knees, and he finds an arrowhead. And I see, and it's so empowering for him, because he's like, this feels like something. And we walk over, and sure enough, it's a really nice worked piece. And he did it on his own. We just gave him the tools to do it. And he left that event feeling so empowered and so encouraged. And he told one of the ranch owners, I was considering taking my life before I came out here. You've made me believe, you've made me feel that confidence again that life is worth living. And it was, that's just one of so many success stories.
What is it about the outdoors, do you think, that triggers that response in people that maybe at a point in their life where they feel like they have nothing else?
I think Andrew has some really good experience with that as well, and I think I'll let him handle that one.
Yeah, sure. I think, Drew, to your question, I'm the grandson of two World War II veterans. My grandfather was actually a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, and was with General Patton, kind of liberating Nazi camps in Germany. And then my other grandfather was one of the first frogmen before they had Navy SEALs in the U.S. Navy in the South Pacific.
Wow.
And so both of my grandfathers really had a sense of the outdoors and a deep sense of connection with it. So I remember when I was 4 years old, going fishing with my dad's dad, William Black, who was the staff sergeant in the Army, and we went fishing. And of course, as a 4-year-old boy, I'm out there, throwing rocks and causing havoc. And he tells me, "Shh, you're going to spook all the fish." And I still remember looking at that moment and watching my grandfather kind of sneak up on the next unsuspecting trout in this stream, and watching him when I was 4 years old. This is 1984. Watching him kind of move up the stream and realizing that he seemed very different. He seemed at peace. He seemed like nature was a part of him, and it wasn't something he was stepping into. It was something that was part of his soul. And I watched, this is a generation that had a lot of trauma, a lot of need for services, but there weren't really any, right? There was no PTS counseling. There was not a lot of support for that generation coming out of World War II. So what I realized in both my grandfathers, and both of them were big fishermen, was that they had gone to the outdoors to seek that sense of healing and wholeness and peace, and a sense of solidarity with something not only within themselves but far greater than themselves. And so I watched that transformation happen when I was a young man, and my grandfather and I were fishing partners until he passed away when I was 18 years old. And he was the one who taught me how to fish, and why I'm a fly fisherman today and guide people. And I kind of took that story of transformation and watching what nature did to him to help heal him and help him find a sense of peace. And it made me realize that one of my big passions in being the National Wildlife Federation's Director of Public Lands is to help opportunities for helping veterans and their families get out on these public lands. A lot of veterans, Shilo, it's an amazing opportunity to sit next to a war hero and a man who's become a good friend over the last couple of years, and who I'm really humbled and honored to be sitting next to in this podcast. But recognizing that, Shilo's one of many, and there's so many opportunities to get folks outside and get veterans outside, and that these veterans veterans didn't just fight to protect our communities and our country, but they also fought to protect our public lands and to protect access to those public lands. And so many of the veterans that I've worked with, whether it's through programs like Project Healing Waters or other, kind of veterans fishing programs, or just, getting outreach from veterans that know me and say, hey, will you take me and my family out fly fishing, or a couple of us out fly fishing? And I think getting to know those folks, what I've realized and kind of learned through that journey and experience is there's a really important opportunity for sense of healing, wholeness, and peace, but also an opportunity to help, these veterans reconnect with these public lands that they fought to protect, and also, help work with these veterans and engage them and empower them, as Shilo was saying, to kind of fight for these public lands at an advocacy level. Because I think once they're on these lands, or we get to join them when they're already on these lands, they realize how important and transformative some of these spaces can be. And so I think that then the question becomes, well, what do we do to protect these and make sure we get more people out here? And so that could be their families, that could be other veterans. And so I think that that's a lot of the passion and joy I have, is not only getting out on the landscape with veterans and their families and groups of veterans, but also at the same time, then helping them figure out, okay, how do we make sure that others get this experience? Yeah. How do we make sure that we support legislation that helps promote veterans getting outdoors to our national parks and our public lands? How do we make sure that, the wildlife and the habitat is in good shape, so that if we come out here and hike and camp and fish and hunt on these lands, it'll be a really amazing opportunity that we pass down to not only this generation of folks, but to the many generations, whether that's your kids or future veterans, right?
But I think that we've built ourselves this image of what we should be doing for our children and what we should be doing for ourselves, and we make our homes and our entertainment centers so comfortable that it's hard to take ourselves away from them. And unfortunately, it is nice to have a nice entertainment system. It's nice to have a nice home, but you can't forget our roots, so to speak. You got to get out there and enjoy the outdoors as much as possible, whether it be a city park or whether it be the lake, or going on a ski trip, going hiking at a hiking trail. But this is what I've seen, and I take my kids just about everywhere, that we can get outdoors and enjoy something. Sadly, though, nowadays there's so much garbage that you have to contend with, and I think that some people probably just try to avoid certain areas because of the trash, or the overpopulation in some of these areas. But I think that that's another reason why it's so important. My dad, Vietnam veteran, my grandfather, World War II, and yes, I grew up very similar to you guys. My grandfather taking me out fishing, my dad took me out fishing, and there probably wasn't a river or stream near us that we hadn't waded in, swam in, fished in, something. When we went, yes, we would take our food and water and that sort of thing, and we took every bit of our trash, and then every bit of trash that was there when we got there. I think that if we was to encourage that and practice that it would probably open the door for more people to want to go outdoors and experience lakes and that sort of thing. And I don't know, maybe it's just like one of those things where people just don't want to address it. Maybe they just don't want to see it. I really don't know. But I think that it's important that everybody practices conservation. I think it's important that everybody gets out there and enjoys the outdoors, whether it be one thing or another. You don't have to go hunting. You don't have to go fishing. It's go out there and just experience the outdoors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, what Shilo is talking about is really important. We've seen studies here at the National Wildlife Federation and when we were working on things like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that are showing that getting kids outdoors statistically and from a medical perspective makes them smarter, happier, and healthier is just a way to sum up the research. And so I think, when you're getting kids outdoors, it's going to improve their cognitive skills, their physical abilities, but also just their sense of their mental health, their emotional happiness. And it's an opportunity for them to to reconnect with wildlife, to reconnect with themselves, to have fun outdoors, recreation, and then to learn skills. And I think Shilo really hit on a really important thing of sometimes when you're working, for example, with kids or veterans, you can look at some folks and say, man, these are really confident people. You have a veteran that you're working with, and this person led an entire, crew through a battlefield, right? And then, and as Shilo was saying, that sometimes, getting them back out in the doors helps them reconnect with that side of themselves that's very confident, or sometimes hasn't felt as confident since maybe returning stateside. And so I think that those things are just sometimes often overlooked, and those little small kind of pieces that get built into these bigger opportunities and programs are so important, because once you have that confidence, as Shilo can kind of testify, I think that the real opportunity to face adversity and challenges, you're more willing to take those things head on, and so you're sometimes maybe more willing to get help if you need it. You're sometimes also maybe more willing to deal with some challenges you may have around applying for a job or seeking health benefits, some of those things. So I think just one of the things that I've experienced in a lot of the veterans that we work with and getting them outdoors is just an opportunity for them to kind of have some perspective, to slow down a little bit, maybe reconnect with their families themselves, have fun, but also maybe sometimes grow in that confidence or skills, or just have a little bit of a different perspective on how they approach life. And when you're sitting next to someone like Shilo Harris, it's humbling. I mean, this guy is a war hero. The amount of stuff that he's been through, through combat, and whether those combat missions or humanitarian missions, is really remarkable. And it's humbling and an honor to sit next to him, knowing kind of what he's done in this world and kind of the stuff he's also been through. But the thing that I think, to me, Shilo really embodies and epitomizes is the fact that he's still serving. Shilo is a humble guy. He sometimes won't tell you all the things that he's done, but Shilo, and maybe another veteran that we work with, Marty Floyd, who's with the Louisiana Wildlife Federation, is a Vietnam veteran. They both went to Washington D.C. and they worked on protecting sage grouse and making sure that a bad rider that was on the National Defense Authorization Act, that would have prevented the listing of sage grouse for 10 years under the Endangered Species Act, was going to be tacked on to that National Defense Authorization Act. And Shilo and Marty and Mary Ann all went out to Washington, D.C., and they met with more congressional leaders and senators and House members and talked to them about the importance of protecting wildlife and the importance of keeping that kind of bad rider off of a defense bill. And so, there's a great example of how Shilo's giving back to conservation, protecting wildlife, protecting public lands, but also a really amazing example of how he's still serving this country and really still serving the world. And so, to have an opportunity to sit next to him today is really humbling, because you're talking about folks who have not only given so much to serve when they're under traditional service terms, right? But, to sit next to him today and to meet with Jamie, his wife, and see how they continue to serve our communities and our countries, whether that's through advocacy or whether that's just lending a helping hand to another veteran in need, is really what it's all about. And to me, that's why I was so honored to have him come out to our annual meeting and speak, because he's an amazing human being, and I think he's a human being who really gets that sense of service at the deepest level, and has continued to do so in an incredible way.
And Shilo, what was that experience like, going to Washington, D.C., advocating for the outdoors that you spent so much time getting people involved with?
Ironically, it was different. I've been on the Hill state side, or at the state level, and then of course in DC a couple of different times before, but this one just felt where I needed to be. It was once I read everything about it, about the sage grouse and then trying to put it on the national defense, and obviously I'm a little biased towards making sure that the military has what they need, but at the same time I'm looking at this and I'm like, so does the military really need this, land? Do they really need this to be operational ready? And Senator John McCain, obviously, he felt the same way that probably many of us did. It was like, that has no place on this bill. It doesn't affect our training. It doesn't affect our readiness. So it shouldn't be on there. It looked like an avenue that could be potentially opened up for something else. And how did it feel? It felt really good. It felt empowering to be a part of something that, who's going to advocate for animals if we don't, if somebody doesn't? The animals really can't speak for themselves, but if you are on the ground and you're witnessing these, these tragedies in some ways, but for goodness sakes, we have to preserve, we have to save these lands, and we have to save these animals, and it's just, it's like I said, it felt like that's where I needed to be. And it was an amazing feeling for me.
Well, and one of the things that I thought was really incredible is, folks, I think today in our country and in our sense of government, always question, can they make a difference, right? And, it was amazing to me because, I'm from New Mexico. I know Senator Heinrich really well. And Senator Heinrich contacted me and said, literally, there were senators, all day long marching into those closed door meetings telling folks, look, these veterans are talking about sage grouse. You need to get this bad rider off the National Defense Authorization Act. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And that was both House members and senators. And so Senator Heinrich was talking to me saying, the veterans that are standing up to make sure that the defense bill is about defense and isn't getting pulled in weird sideways directions are really making a huge difference up here because they're standing up for what they know matters. They have a lived experience based on all of this. And, they're literally influencing House members and senators in real time to go in to make sure that things like this bad rider weren't included on the National Defense Authorization Act. So it's really a powerful testimony to have, a U.S. Senator reach out to you and say, really appreciated all those veterans that came out here and talked with these folks and kind of helped D.C. have a little bit of perspective on this issue because they really did make a huge difference. And Shilo, I think, was, certainly leading the charge. I know you met with Senator Cornyn and you met with Representative Mass from Florida and you met with a lot of folks directly. And, you've got deep ties to Texas and Oklahoma, and I know you worked with all those delegations. So
even some indirectly too. In the elevator, people are like, "Hey, Shilo, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Well, it just so happens." And they're like, "Well, I'm on the National Defense Committee. I guess I'll have to look into that."
Yeah.
So it worked out really good, But yeah, I didn't realize I knew so many politicians. I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, right? But no, I love everybody up there. It's got to be a tough job in the public eye like that all the time. And, it is hard to know everything that's thrown on those policies. And I think that's really important about the lobbying, bringing that attention to maybe something that they might have overlooked. But this is something else I've noticed is, a lot of those men and women are outdoors people as well. They want to go out there and enjoy hunting, fishing. They want to go enjoy the trails. So I think that they had a bit of empathy when we come in there and like, hey, this is what we're looking at. And you see them going, yeah, okay, I can see that. I can see that.
Yep.
Wait, you mentioned something a little bit earlier when you talked about this potential rider and what John McCain said about mission ready. What do people have to do to get ready if right now maybe somebody hasn't thought that they're up to the challenges of the outdoors? What would be the first step that they need to take to make sure that they're ready and they're prepared to go out and take that first step into doing what you're advocating for?
Well, I'm going to throw my opinion out there, and then I'm going to let Andrew do his. But the first thing that I believe that you should do, and it's one of the things that Jamie and I do before any adventure we go on, is we do our research. We look at equipment, especially safety equipment. We look at weather. We look at, the terrain. We look at all these different factors. How far is the nearest hospital? We know the location that we're going to go to, and then we always set ourselves up a rally point. We always make sure that we have plenty of water, plenty of food, and first aid kits. All these things. And is there going to be cell reception? Nowadays, cellular phones have become part of our life. Whether you want your kids to drag their phones out on the trail or not, somebody should probably have a phone. And if it's no cell reception out there, that's good. We always take our little walkie-talkies. We have little handhelds nowadays that I've been encouraging the kids to use, and we all have a call sign too. So, I'm like, so Glenn, we call him Ranger 1. He's Ranger 1. He loves that, man.
I bet he does.
Like,
that's awesome.
Dad, this is Ranger 1. I'm like, I'm not Dad today. And he goes, oh, yeah, Blue 4, this is Ranger 1. And I'm
that makes it fun. It's important to do that with kids. You got to make it fun. That's right.
So you don't want to do your research. Make sure that you have the right equipment. And you can. Yes, it is nice to even going outside your front door. We teach them. It doesn't matter where you're going, whether it's 5 miles from here or if you're going 500 miles from here. You make sure that you prepare yourself for what if, weather, everything.
Yeah, I mean, Shilo knocked that one out of the park. I mean, that is spot on. I think self-awareness is really important, kind of knowing your own limitations and boundaries and kind of starting slow and kind of figuring that out and not going, too overzealous and getting yourself over the tips of your skis, so to speak.
Guilty.
Yeah, exactly. So, just kind of finding that sense of self-awareness and boundaries and being humble enough to kind of, know that's where you're starting out. It doesn't mean that's where you're going to end. And one of the things I love about, Shilo and Jamie and what they're talking about is that, also perseverance through adversity and a willingness to kind of, push your boundaries, but also know your boundaries. I think that's really important. And especially when it comes to the outdoors. And the other thing is, the National Wildlife Federation has affiliates in every state and territory pretty much around. And so, you've got some great resources through all of the different affiliates in each state to kind of connect with. And there's folks out there that, whether it may be, someone like my grandfather in my life or Shilo's dad in his life or, some other mentor or leader in the community through one of the affiliates of the National Wildlife Federation. I think there's great resources out there to kind of connect with and say, hey, would you be willing to, are you all doing any hikes? Are you all doing any fishing trips? Or my kids really want to learn to get out on the landscape and camp. And so, we do a lot of work to help families get out. We do a lot of work to help, teach kids fishing and, archery and those kind of things, because sometimes you just need somebody with a little bit of that expertise and skill, and it can be a little intimidating to kind of jump into that. And so one of the most sacred roles I think I have and really enjoy is just a chance to help some folks maybe learn or pass down some of that knowledge, because it is pretty awesome to watch a kid, shoot their first bullseye or to catch their first fish, or to set up a tent. I remember working with a single mother and her two daughters, and they had never been camping before, and just watching the joy of them setting up the tent and going camping for the first time and talking to them all about that. You really got to see transformation and
self-empowerment.
Yep,
Oh my God,
awesome,
you're
awesome.
empowering these individuals, and you're right. And I see it in my kids.
Yep.
I see it in other kids. It's like when we take. It's like I host the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts at my house as often as possible, and and it feels good because the whole time I'm like, so if you're going to go do this, you got to do that. And I'm giving all these tips, teaching them how to build campfires, making sure they keep that fire contained. I'm like, you don't need a bonfire. All you need is a little fire.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
it is. It's empowering for these people, and it's something else that you said is passing that information down.
Yep.
What's the legacy that you're leaving your family?
Yeah.
What is it that you're teaching your family? And honestly, nowadays it's kind of far and beyond to imagine, that we would ever lose electricity or, that we would have some kind of a crisis, where you'd have to survive outdoors. But so often do you pick up the newspaper or open up your app that has the news on it or whatever it is, you watch it on TV, somebody survived being stranded, somebody survived this, somebody survived that. By the grace of God, or was it because they were prepared?
Yep. Yeah, and I think Shilo's dead on, and I think as working with youth, especially parents, it's never too late to learn something. I picked up kind of archery later in my life, and I've got my niece and nephew into it, and they love to have competitions with their uncle on who can shoot the most bullseye and against each other. But it was one of those things where here I am in my middle 30s saying, you know what, I'm going to learn to shoot a traditional bow, and I'm going to get good enough at it where I can also teach others to do it. And so I think it's one of those things where I'd grown up fly fishing, love fishing, saltwater, freshwater, lakes, rivers, whatever, and that was really a lot of my skill set. So when I'd go camping and stuff like that, that was where I'd lean on. And you lean on your strengths, right? But I also think one of the things folks like Shilo and Jamie really talk about is also learning to develop those weaknesses and pushing through some of those areas where you need to grow. And so that was one of the reasons I picked up archery and really got into shooting a traditional bow was I wanted to be able to pass it along to the next generation, and I knew they were going to be into it, and I also wasn't willing. I was willing to really push myself. And so I think there's those kind of things that I always talk to parents about to say, look, if you're not naturally, you haven't been camping, it doesn't mean it's too late to learn. And you can get out there and you can learn alongside with your kids, and that's great too. And they'll learn a lot from you learning. and that's just a great way to do a lot of the outdoors. And there's a lot of people around that I think want to help you succeed in that. And so, I always encourage parents to say, look, it's okay if you don't know how to do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't feel ashamed. Let's figure out how to help you get the knowledge you get so you can pass it on to your kids or your grandkids.
That's really important. So I tell my kids all the time, if I don't know how to do this, I'll say, you know what, I've never done this before. Let's figure it out together. And it kind of brings that team concept into whatever the adventure is that you're doing. Because if the kid, even the kids might be like, well, I'm going to follow Dad's lead. But if you say, hey, I've never done this before, let's figure this thing out, then it's like, it kind of gives them that sense of, well, I need to help. I want to be a part of this, and I'm going to learn, so that way maybe, I can help my dad or help my mom or whatever. And so, come out and be honest about it and say, let's do this together. And I've seen it just really inspires the kids to be a little bit more involved with it as opposed to just following your lead.
Yep. And if people want to get involved with the work that you're doing and the initiative that you're pushing with Boundless Spirit, how can they best do that?
So we have a website, Boundless Spirit International, that people can go to, and generally right now it's for speaking, but what we're doing is we're encouraging adventure. We're encouraging people enjoying their freedoms and going out there and finding joy in their life. If you're in a rut and you're depressed, or maybe you think you're depressed, or maybe you're just not happy with your situation where you're at, step back. Really evaluate your situation. Go spend an hour, down the road in the park. Go spend an hour sitting by the lake or the river or something and try to recalibrate your life. Get an aerial view of your situation and say, what can I do different? And if you're thinking that maybe the outdoors is what you're missing, it's not going anywhere right now. Go out there and enjoy it. Start doing your research online. Find out where you can go camping, what equipment you're going to need to go do that, and start setting yourself up a trip. But joining NWF, I think, is another great avenue, doing the research to join this organization, be a part of it, donate, so that way we can continue to educate the community and the public.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing, one way to connect with Shilo, he's got a great book called Still Will that's out there. You got a new book coming out, right?
Yeah, working on another book, working on a movie too. We've got a lot of different things. Of course, we're on social media. I think Jamie's, though, is Jamie PK, not Jamie Harris. Mm-hmm. Mine is Shilo A. Harris. And then, I don't know, we got Boundless. I don't know, I like social media to a certain extent, but I don't understand why you got to have like 12 different, Facebook and Twitter accounts and this.
We'll make sure we do is we'll link to those in the show notes on this. I want to wrap this up though with a call to action, and the call to action that I want people to be able to take after listening to this, because what I feel like doing, like we're recording this at the annual meeting, we're in a meeting room. Listening to you makes me want to go out and take a hike. What's the first thing for people to do that listen to this podcast? Where can they find a place to take a hike that you've actually made sure through your visit to Washington will continue to be around? What's the first thing that they can do as soon as they get done listening to this to go out and enjoy the outdoors?
It's really easy. I usually just look at my map app and do nature trails. And I type in nature trails and many of them pop up. I did that one day. There was a couple of them that we went to, and then I was like, there's bound to be more. And I did nature trails, and I just kept zooming out. And then come to find out, I had several. There's several around us, and we didn't even know it. And so each time we've been trying to go to a different park. Just getting out there, and some of the trails are easy. Some of them are more advanced. If we go to California, come to find out, there's a lot of outdoor hiking trails in California, and we've tried to experience some of those. You said something about knowing your limitations. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a little overzealous. I'm like, oh yeah, it won't be. We'll just do 5 miles. About 3 miles later, I was like, we might want to turn back.
That's smart. That's right. That's exactly right.
It was like 3 miles uphill.
Learn that about a linear trail is if you take a 5 mile hike, you got to get back 5 miles.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. If it's not a loop, that's different, right? Yep. Yeah. Well, and Drew, to your point, I think that there's a lot of great ways to get outside. Our public lands are incredible treasures in this country. We got over 600 million acres across the country, and that's everything from national monuments to national parks to Forest Service lands to BLM lands. And so there's just some incredible spaces that I think are just wonderful places to kind of get out and see nature kind of unfold before your eyes. And so, there's great resources for that. There's great books. There's great maps. You can always go to a national park visitor center, those kind of things.
Handicap accessible?
Yep.
There's many that are handicap accessible now. And I mean, wheelchair accessible, depending on your abilities. I mean, seriously, it's look it up. Look it up.
And one of the other things, and Shilo and I were talking about is there's also a lot of opportunities for advocacy. So some folks are not only wanting to get outdoors, but also how do we protect this? How do we make a difference? Shilo was talking earlier about the Accelerating Veterans Recovery Outdoors Act, which is, House in the U.S. House Bill 2435 from Jersey Shore Congressman Chris Smith is kind of the lead on that bill. And that bill is really working to kind of help make sure that veterans can get outdoors, that there's a streamline between the VA and other federal public land agencies to make sure that veterans are outdoors, and it's working on everything from physical health to mental health. And there's a real intentionality between the federal agencies that manage the landscapes and the VA that works with a lot of veterans. And so that bill is really trying to build that intentionality in there, provide some good resources, and to make sure that those conversations are happening for the betterment of not only veterans but their families and the whole community. So that's a great advocacy opportunity. Also, continuing to fight for things like the full funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I mean, a lot of that fund is going to protect public lands to make sure that there's good access for sportsmen and women, but also protects everything and helps provide resources for parks, swimming pools, walking trails, things in local communities, baseball fields, right? And so programs like the Land and Water Conservation Fund and making sure that they have the adequate resources that they need are really important to make sure that there's, continues to be good outdoor recreation opportunities to promote, the health of all Americans, really. And so that's just, those are two federal bills that I think are really important for advocacy, and I'm sure there's a lot of different ones that our state affiliates can help, target you in terms of what's going on in the states and how to kind of make sure that these issues are brought to the forefront.
Shilo, thank you for joining the NWF Outdoors podcast. Everybody go check out Boundless Spirit, and more than anything, just go get outdoors. This has been Drew Youngdyke with the National Wildlife Federation's podcast.